Hi.
Hey, what's up, Hallie?
It's
How you doing?
going great. I'm glad to have had this opportunity to hang out with you virtually because even though we never really have, it's still something, especially right
Oh
now.
yeah, yeah. No, I feel you. How's everything been going? How's the quarantine and all that good stuff?
New York City is wild. I'm sure anybody watching from the area, if anyone is watching from the area, will know that New York City is once again a huge hub for a lot of things. And it's been really positive. I've seen the movement go by where I live multiple times, and it's humbling. It's amazing to see. I'm so proud of my city. A little shamed of the way that the NYPD are handling things, but
Right,
at any
right.
given moment, that's applicable to any police department across the country at the moment. It looks like a lot of
Yeah.
problems are happening in a lot of places, but New York City doesn't have a great reputation for an amazing police force to begin with as far as these types of incidents. So it's not better, and it should be by now. And I hope it gets better soon because I think the attention is fully on it, and hopefully we're moving in the right direction. But we'll see. How are things down there?
Things are good. Tampa's good. We've been having protests pretty much since the 30th of May, which is my birthday. We didn't. I don't think we had any today. Actually, this might be the first day that at least I didn't know of any that actually took place today. So, yeah. But we've got some on tap for this weekend. I know that. So I'm gonna be out in the streets and stuff, and
That's
make
awesome.
sure our voices are heard and we're seen, and we're trying to make sure we're fighting the good fight. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And of course, there's so many different ways to participate in this movement. And I know a lot of people who participate. I'm so sorry for the squeak toy that my dog has found,
No,
if
you're
that's
good.
bothering anybody.
You're
um,
good.
there's definitely so many ways to participate in this movement. And it doesn't always have to be out on the streets. But if you're able to be out on the streets, that's definitely the best way to be out there in numbers, making your voices heard in a very literal way by screaming at the top of your lungs into the void, as it were. But there's so many ways other than that to participate, and I've definitely been partaking more in those things because where my privilege is, I would definitely say my financial privilege is giving me the ability to support these movements and the bailouts and all of the education funds and all of the relief efforts, because those are the things that are going to bolster this movement and allow people to keep doing the things in real life on the street that they're doing while people like us are bailing them out and making sure that everybody feels supported going into the future, especially children. And it's just been pretty wild, but I'm so glad that it's happening in a really weird way because I know that it's not, it shouldn't have gotten to this point.
Yeah.
But it's important that we take advantage of what we have at the moment and run with it and run it up, because if we don't take advantage of the attention that we have right now and use it, we're going to lose it. And
No, I
so that's
agree.
always something to move forward with. And there's a lot to be said for the positive things that are going on because, of course, there's negative as well.
No, for
But
sure.
I choose not to associate with that, and I choose not to focus on it because the attention that the negativity gets is it's a redirect and it's just a diversion, and it's not really about what we're about.
No doubt, no doubt. Yeah, so we can get rolling. I love it. I love it. So, I'm happy that you can join today. I mean, this is day 5 of 37 conversations. Our topic today is going to be about EDM culture and Black history's role in EDM culture, really. And before we get rolling, before I start talking about some stuff here, I wanted to introduce you, Hallie. So give you a moment to say where you're from and who you are and all that good stuff.
Surely. My name is Hallie, as he said. I'm from New York City. I've always lived here. I grew up here. And being surrounded by diversity has never given me anything short of every opportunity I could to learn anything that I ever wanted to about all the cultures that surround me, and including every music culture I could possibly want to be a part of. But it just so happens that somebody like me with my upbringing ended up in the dance community after a lot of different phases. I would say it didn't always start with me loving dance music. I remember a long time ago in 8th grade when I got my first iPod, I knew I wanted to load it up, and I just hopped on LimeWire and kind of went nuts. And I never realized what I was discovering. And it came to me naturally, but I would say I definitely had to look for dance music. But I'm so glad I found it. What means the most to me about that community is that house music, dance music, techno music, it is Black music. It is Black history. Everything about it is rooted in the underground and oppressed cultures that bore the movement. And a lot of that has to do with its roots in disco. And New York City, as you know, had one of the largest disco scenes. We had Studio 54. We had all of these wonderful parties. And a lot of the spotlight was shined on the culture that we have here. Being a very densely populated urban area, other densely populated urban areas are also going to be, once I get into it, where you'll find that these places started this show. And a lot of it was very hard to discover, unfortunately. So for people to get into this scene, they have to know somebody. And I can't believe that it's so hard for people to stumble upon it at this point, because the fact that house music and dance music and trance and techno, all of it, it's Black music. It's not mine. It's not my history. It's not my lore. It's not my culture. It came from a place where people felt like they needed to create their own safe space. So I'd love to just get into it, because I really want to talk about the literal facts and timeline of what it is to be a part of this world that I'm so proud to be in. So
I love it. So let me touch on some things real quick. I love it. I'll kick it back to
sure.
you. So I moved, Hallie. I moved to Tampa in like 2013, and my first experience with EDM, also known as electric dance music, but better known as EDM, was in like about 2014, 2015. And the timing of this conversation is great. The conversation we had last night with my father was about the discussions that Black parents have with their Black children and such. And excuse me. So it was kind of heavy for some people, and I got some messages about it and stuff. And I know this is a good, very meaningful discussion as well. But it was also this kind of uplifting because we're talking about music and everything. So, 2015, I had some friends of mine. The Sunset Music Festival takes place here in Tampa, and they were
Sure.
like, "Hey, you should come to Sunset. You should go to Sunset and try this out. Check out the scene." I was like, you need to justify me, doing this. You got to explain to me, because I knew a little bit about house and trance and definitely
Sure.
trap music, which trap is my favorite, but I also like chants because I shuffle and stuff. So, but
Sure.
yeah, but so I was like, you got to sell this to me. And my friends were like, no, you got to do it, man. You got to experience it. So, of the many conversations that I've been having with friends in this moment, one of my best friends, his name is Paul. Shout out to my boy Paul Selfmade 904 is his Instagram, if y'all can follow him. But he's deep in the EDM scene as well. He lives in Jacksonville. But we've been talking a lot about how EDM culture, it's a microcosm of society, but then also it's not reflective of society, because the all welcoming space that the culture is and that the space is different. I mean, I try to explain this to some of my friends who don't go to festivals and so on, that so of course, for those who aren't aware, there are all different types of festivals, right? And the most popular ones are probably the EDC ones, like Electric Daisy Carnival. Of course, EDC Las Vegas is like the mecca for EDC, and then there's EDC Orlando and Mexico and Japan and Europe. It's all over the place. Well, I try to express to my friends, the feeling at a festival is unlike anything else. I mean, you have all types of people there. You have international people there, of course, men and women, of course. Our brothers and sisters from the LGBTQ community are there. And it's a great blend, right? It's a great blend of just people. Mm-hmm. And it's just a great time. I mean, I've never been to an EDM festival or EDM concert, for that matter, where there's like fighting and stuff. I mean, I'm serious. I mean, and you've been to, larger festivals than me, more than me. You're talking about, so depending on the size, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people, whatever, if not more than that. And it's just, everyone is there to just enjoy each other and to experience each other. I mean, for those who aren't familiar, I mean, PLUR, peace, love, unity, respect is a big, no matter what festival you're at, that's the common theme that resonates throughout festivals and EDM culture. But then also EDC itself, the Electric Daisy Carnival brand, here all are welcome. Here all are welcome is, just the phraseology and the terminology that is really branded for EDC's festivals and their gatherings and so on. And it's truly like that. And it's something that, unless you experience it, you might not realize it, especially because I think sometimes there's some misnomers that are associated with EDM and everything like that. But I just like good music. I mean, I've lived all over the world and I like all different types of music. My favorite music is 90s hip hop and R&B, and that's probably why I gravitate more to some of the some of the trap and everything like that. But like I said, I like trance. I like some of the techno. I like a little bit of it all, right? But I also have a great and deep appreciation for EDM, and so talking about having talked about the culture a little bit and how it's a blend in a microcosm of society already a little bit. We discussed already introduced yourself. So I kind of want to talk about, before we get into the history and such, and this connection with like Black history and everything like that, about this moment that we're in. I mean, you've touched on it a little bit, and maybe there's not more that you have to expand on, but as to what's your feelings about this moment that we're in? I mean, you live in New York, so you're very well, versed in the some of the relationships that communities of color have, not just only in New York, but other places. But we're on the heels of what I think Eric Garner's death was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. If not a little bit more than that. I'm not exactly sure coming off the top of my head. But I'm sure you were in the area for that. So you probably saw some of the outcry and the pain and the hurt and the frustration that resulted from that. But, in recent times, in the last month or so, of course, there's, Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, of course, George Floyd. So I'm just curious about your perspectives on where we are and, how we, us coming to this moment that we're in right now, what it means to you.
What it means to me is that this is unfortunately a very similar instance that created movements like the one that we're speaking to. Looking into patterns of behavior and what leads to rioting, and looking at the timeline of even just the Stonewall riots, it lines up completely with what happened when disco was still a thing. And there were nothing but marginalized and people of color at the forefront of that movement. And I think it's so reflective of the times and of these waves that we feel. Every now and then it just breaks. And this is a breaking point. Right. And I'm so happy that we've gotten to this point, no matter how horrible it is that we've gotten here, that I'm so glad to see that eventually the water will pull out again. And I don't necessarily want to discredit anything by using such an analogy, but it's pivotal that we, as a culture of people and also as a diverse people here in New York City in particular, with how much of the scene is here, that we take this and we make it important. Because there's ways for all of these business owners to not allow this to be important. And I want to make sure that going forward, a lot more of what movements have been going on are a part of what we do and what we are as a community. Because all of this is about community. People don't feel like they belong. People don't feel welcome. And to me, it's unacceptable. And I know for a fact, because I've talked to my friends that are people of color, Black, African American, LGBTQ, some people don't even feel comfortable going to the events I go to because they feel that they're predominantly white. And they feel that they'll be targeted because they will be in the minority group at those events. And to think that it started with Black culture and it got to a point where it's so far removed from Black culture and Black history and Black legends, it's shameful. Right. And I'd like to get back to that. So I think what I would like to see happen is a lot more efforts to create diverse lineups, because a lot of the lineups are the heavy hitters from Europe, and most of them are not people of color. And yes, they're talented. Yes, they create revenue because they draw a crowd, but they're not the only people out there that can do that. And to see somebody on a stage that is more reflective of who you are as a person, you're going to connect with that person just like they did back then and just like they still do. And there's a reason that some of these shows are packed full of people, like even Dioro. I don't know if you know who this DJ is, but his crowd is predominantly Latin American. And that's because he is. That's because his sound reflects that. And all of the footprints that all of the cultures that lead the way to all of these things, they're there. These stretches of DNA, they're all inside of everything that we see in these movements. And if it weren't for the LGBTQ community, the drag community that was a part of disco, and all of the people of color that gave disco its fame, and even just shows like Soul Train. Like there are so many things that were predominantly focused on the culture around people of color and the disco moment, that it would be such a rejection of those things to move away from that completely and ignore that that's a thing. Because if it weren't for all of those groups, we wouldn't be where we are.
Right. No, I hear that. No, I hear that. So what's your affinity to? I know you talked about the community a little bit, and I know you talked about your love for music and everything, but like, how did you acquire your historical context and historical knowledge about, you know, the deep roots of EDM and all that?
Sure, that's definitely something I have up here.
Yeah.
My experience with EDM started with house and techno, which are what most people would say are the foundation of what dance music is now. And I grew out into the rest of the more specific niche, smaller genres,
Sure.
which are a little bit more intense in other ways and a little bit farther from what the house and techno feel is like. So things like hardstyle, it couldn't be more different from what house sounds like.
Right.
But there's roots there still, and there's definitely still some DNA woven in, and it's more about the culture at that point than the music itself, because the music itself, you'd never think that they came from the same place. But when I started with house and techno and then moved on to these other genres, most people that are in our world, they do it the reverse.
Right.
They start with these bass music, trance, dance. They start with the more niche genres and then grow into house and techno, because you almost have to grow an affinity for it. You almost have to understand it and appreciate it. But I wish that more people did it the way that I did it and had the chance to do that and be exposed to it in a way that gave you that education from the very beginning. It gives you roots. It gives you the understanding that you need to understand where all of these other genres even came from.
Right.
And so the fact that I went in what most people say backwards order, starting with house and techno and then moving away from it, that says a lot about what the culture is like right now, because a lot of people that are into house and techno end up being the older crowds. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I definitely do, especially here in the clubs and in like the fancier venues, because they'll get the house acts and then they'll put a hard style act in some decrepit house that looks like an apartment that's in shambles, and it's not even got a real sound system in it. But the house music DJs will get like marquee.
Right.
And so there's a dichotomy there that almost seems like a rejection of the new genres because they're not the authentic originals. And I think that it should be the opposite. I think people should start with it. I think people should start with resident DJs at places like what Pasha once was. Of course, our New York Pasha is now gone. But those roots and listening to local resident DJs who were predominantly people of color, getting that music education literally from knowing those people, going out into the world and understanding all these other genres. I wouldn't appreciate the new genres that have come out since then the way that I do without the knowledge that I came with.
No, most definitely.
And so I think it's so fundamental. And I think you don't have to love house and techno. As of today, I'm not a huge fan because the culture seems to reject new people because they have that sort of bubble around them where they are the originals. Right. And they appreciate themselves as such, but they also seem to refuse a lot of other people who are just trying to experience the dance music community as they are, because they don't necessarily identify with the new genres. So if you like the new genres, but you also want to go to a house show, you might not feel at home.
Right.
And it's a shame. I think there should be much more of a blurred line there, because without house and techno, you wouldn't have dubstep, but without the dubstep people, you wouldn't have revenue for these house and techno tents to be at these big festivals, because a lot of the new DJs, like even let's just mention Skrillex briefly. Right. Somebody like him, he draws a crowd. Mm-hmm. His music is not for everybody, but everybody can listen to house and appreciate house and enjoy house, even if it's just while you're eating your hot dog kind of near the techno tent. You know, it's a different unity and it's a different energy. And I think that there needs to definitely be much more of a blending of the two, because my experience gave me that. And I'm fortunate that I did it backwards, let's say, but most people don't.
So would you say that there's like dare we say like there was a whitewashing in some respect of the
100%.
Yeah. So what do you think caused that, created that? Where do you think that came from? And I'm actually
the rejection that happened. Basically what happened in the US, and this is a gross condensing of all of these things, the US rejected this scene so much that it squashed it into the underground in the 90s. Yep. So in the 80s and 90s, which is when all of this was happening, The US rejected it so much so that when Europe didn't reject it, it blew up there.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of the European scene exploded. And all of these DJs were of European descent and they latched onto it. The inspiration was the house and techno movements that were happening here in Detroit, Chicago, and New York. But it didn't have a footing here. It didn't latch on because society was like, oh no, you just need to party in a warehouse. You don't care. Like, you're just reckless party goers that want to do drugs. But in Europe, it became mainstream popular.
Mm-hmm.
It was on radios, it's in TV, it's on commercials. They don't make it so much of a subculture there. It created its own unique way to become normal. And so the European scene exploded. And it did take root in all of the original sections of the world. And I would say with the exclusion of the UK, that does have Black roots with all of the drum and bass and the breakbeat that came out of the UK. With the exception of those places, most of it was taking the techno footprint and creating things like trance, which did not get any footing until it created itself in Europe. That's not an American sound. And as you can see by the popularity of certain things in the US, or I guess I should say lack thereof, of popularity of certain genres here, you can see that it didn't come from here. And house and techno have a home here because we are the creators.
Right.
But it's one of those things where it got whitewashed along the way because of the places that were able to take it and actually create something that was accepted. Whereas in the US, because it was a culture of marginalized people, it was still predominantly people of color, LGBTQ communities, people that were in predominantly urban areas, densely populated areas. They weren't getting licensing for putting on shows. They weren't getting legal liquor licenses. They weren't putting on official, real, sanctioned parties at all here. And if they were, it was at the places that had already given a home to disco. Without that, again, there would be nothing. Because if it weren't for those influences, the New York City scene would still be underground.
Right, no doubt. And it's
so there's a lot of whitewashing for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I mean, you know, some of these conversations thus far, and we're probably gonna, you know, this is probably gonna be a theme in conversations moving forward in some respects. But you know, the appropriation of the culture a little bit is very interesting, right? Because considering that its roots were in, you know, the Black culture, as you were talking about, New York, Detroit, and so on, and then it got, you know, suppressed. And then, you know, because I remember my brother just joined the chat. My brother and I, shout out to Brandon. We lived in Europe in the early 90s. So in the early and mid 90s. And yeah, it was exploding. I mean, that sound was exploding in Europe, you know what I'm saying? Like La Bouche and all of them. And that was essentially, you know, the sound that, as you mentioned, even going back to Soul Train, you know, I mean, I didn't even think about that initially, but you make good references there. And it's very peculiar how now, you know, it's almost pop culture. You know, you're hearing EDM in commercials. You've got, you know, DJs laying down tracks for crossover artists and so on and so forth. It's really interesting, you know, and in many different respects, because it was a part of the, you know, some, as you spoke about as well, like marginalized communities, like the LGBTQ community, people of color and so on. It wasn't, you know, able to catch fire the way that, you know, the people within those communities would have appreciated, which I think it's a strong point to identify and such. But I know, you know, I know there's some more stuff you wanted to, you know, to talk and to rap about regarding the culture and stuff. So go ahead.
Absolutely. And I think we touched on it briefly, but the stigmas that surrounded what these cultures began as is what created the motivation that many of the artists that came of this to even do what they wanted to do, because they didn't have a place anywhere at any table. And these music artists, they weren't getting signed. They weren't creating a music sound that was on the radio. And the way that Europe instantaneously popularized the music and put it into pop charts, what we see now as our popular music is still rap, hip hop, and pop dance music. Right. But people fail to see the dance music DNA that maybe you and I might be able to pick up on that people sometimes just don't see. Mm-hmm. And once all of these things began to occur, it created an environment that would thrive among itself. So the communities that felt that they were safe in this space would eventually thrive. And so once technology got on board, once the 80s hit, and all of the like the loopers, the drum machines, the samplers, all of that, they were taking older music, which some DJs still play on vinyl, which is an amazing thing to see. And the reason that they do that is because they're using sound that was around for so many more years than what we have today. And they're remastering it, which is what all of this started as.
Yep.
So the foundations and the fundamentals and appreciating a DJ that can play vinyl, it goes so much deeper than just the fact that someone knows how to use the equipment.
Right.
It's that they know how to use those sounds to create the music that we now know today. And to create that gap, to bridge that gap is so important. And that's why I think a lot of people today still gravitate towards the older DJs, because they are the ones that were inspired by these original OG foundations, and they were the ones that knew Frankie Knuckles before he died. They were the ones that would be able to have seen the Belleville 3 in person live. And there's just such a wonderful reflection of those sounds when you see it written into some of these people's sets. And there's a reason that the stigmas that surround the button pushers exist, because they're not the ones that are paying homage to the actual DNA of what house and techno music are. They're moving forward with it and using it as a platform off which to jump, but they're not necessarily tributing a lot of what maybe was. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't move forward and that into the future we should not go. I just think that there's a little bit better of a job that we can do to even just demand that they do to tie together what the roots are and what the foundation is that we are building our culture on top of. Because these marginalized and stigmatized groups, they created their own culture because that was their only way to have a safe space. They didn't get the chance to be anything but isolated and alienated. And so the parties that they threw were illegal because they weren't getting a legal license from the town. They didn't get permission from the sheriff. They didn't get police support if they needed it. They didn't get the fire marshal coming in and clearing them to have as many people as they had inside. Nobody wanted to support them at all. And so while everything was blossoming, they still had to fend for themselves. And that obviously not anything like today, where you see police, EMTs, firefighters, you have, event staff, security staff, like you have so much support now, but it's because of the financial support, let's say, of the people that are not the original group. So I would love for people of color, marginalized groups, Black people especially, to feel much more comfortable in these spaces than perhaps they do right now. And I know that that might seem crazy coming out of my mouth, but it needs to be said. Right. Because I look around when I'm at these events and I cannot believe how many people there are not people of color.
Right.
And it's shameful to me because I'm the one appropriating it.
Right.
And I'm the one that's benefiting from the whitewashing that occurred. Now, mind you, there are great artists that are white. I'm not saying that they're not great. And I'm not saying that their crowd isn't going to be predominantly from where they're from, because that's just how it works. But the support that we can give to the artists that are on the come up, or that have a different sound, or that are being a little bit more experimental, or that are people of color that have a solid sound going for themselves, to support that in a real way is to support the future of this movement and to help bring everything back together. Because without the B-52s, Parliament, Prince, Donna Summer, oh my gosh, there's so many, Deborah Cox, like, without all these people, we wouldn't have the music that we have, because we wouldn't have even been able to sample anything.
Yep.
Disco is what house music became because they needed vocals from somewhere. No one was hopping on these. No one was being paid.
Yep.
No one was going into a booth. No one was signing them. And it created its own sort of wave, I suppose. But the second wave of all of this was definitely much more well received. Right. And that's when we're seeing where we are now in the last 15-ish years, knowing from, I would say in my time in high school, after that, through college up to now, was probably the most drastic US acceptance of this. And even within that bubble, the 2010 LA riots that occurred when EDC got kicked out of LA, that still happened. That was recently. Yep. And it's nowhere near the level of riot that we're referring to today. Sure. But it's definitely just a rejection of the culture that we are, the community of people that we are, a complete stigmatization of everything that we are about, and it sets everything back when that happens. It sets everything back when a venue closes, when we have nowhere else to land our feet, when we have nowhere else to go. New York City has lost countless venues because of whatever reason. I believe a lot of it had to do with people trying to take advantage of the event promoters by charging a lot for renting the space, because of course they see the money in it. So there's a lot of ways that people in our world are getting taken advantage of, and it would be a shame to see that nobody could break through and break that ceiling anymore, because it's so difficult to get the recognition, acceptance, and support that you need to be up and coming, because nobody's putting you in if you don't pack that place.
Sure.
And so supporting these people, finding people, like some of my favorites that are recent have come out of these live streams that I'm sure you've been watching as well. I didn't know who half of these people were, but I definitely couldn't have told you what they looked like, because right. EDM's not about that. We don't care what they look like. You can wear a helmet. We don't want you. We want your sound. But we would love for you to be able to feel comfortable in our space and also feel like you can thrive within it. And so a lot of what I would love to see going forward has to do with making sure that we're purposefully shifting our patronage and support to people who, A, are talented, because that does matter. I'm not saying just go support anybody because of who they look like. And making sure that we're supporting local people, because that's how it all started. It doesn't really matter who you are, where you're from. It's all over the globe, this movement now. And that's the best reason to take advantage, because you're not doing something that's not heard of. People know that this exists. And in the US, it's on the come up as far as mainstream, and it's still rejected in many ways. Like the city of Miami still doesn't want anything to do with Ultra, regardless of the fact that they will still allow it to happen and take that money.
Right, absolutely.
They just don't want it because of the association. And all of that negativity, that doesn't need to exist. But there are people that bring that negativity to our front door. And I understand that they're always going to be a part of our scene. And some of what I went into a lot in some of my like written stuff that I have that I'm not even using is that the party goer that we know of today is, by and large, I would say it's 50-50. There's people that want to party, and that there's people that want to be there because they know who it is. They want to be a part of this culture, and they are a part of our community, and they're willing to do the work to fit into that community aesthetic and to understand and absorb our ethics. Because a lot of it is that people want to come in, essentially appropriate what we are, take our music, take our sound, take our lights and colors and beads and fun clothes, and then they want to bring that to other things that don't actually have the value set that we have. Right. And so understanding what it is to have that influence and try to be the positive change in that future world, because we don't even know what events are going to look like now. Post-coronavirus, we're not even looking at the same ball game. And so there's a lot to be said for what we can make sure does happen as a community, and how responsible we are for making sure that certain things happen and certain things don't. Because I think there should be a no tolerance policy at this point for plastic bottles at these events. And I think that there should be an absolutely much more publicized, all are welcome. Seriously, we mean it.
Yep.
Like, because I don't think people really believe. And I understand the apprehension. I understand why you might doubt that you are really welcome there. But I've dragged people by their hair to these events with me, and I've gotten them in the door, and they are like, wow, I didn't realize how much nobody would care that I'm standing here right now.
You don't know.
And a lot of it is they're so worried that they're going to get stared at, or that they're going to be wearing something that doesn't look like an EDM outfit. Literally, no one is bothered. Nope. And we would rather you be there and vibe with us them feel like you're not allowed in. And a lot of what happened behind closed doors in these parties that started it all, first of all, a lot of them were illegal. So a lot of them were a group of people that felt comfortable there because they knew that no one else would take them. But beyond that, it was a group of people who didn't know how else to express themselves, including the drag community, of course, with disco. And they found a home in house music spaces. And what gay clubs predominantly are is dance music.
Yep.
There's retro night at some of the places that I used to go to in college where they would throw in a real, true disco night. And it felt so good because you felt at home, but it felt like a space that was made for you. And it didn't even need to be that you were an LGBTQ person. You didn't need to be POC. You didn't need to be Black. You didn't need to be Latin American. You didn't need to be anything. But that was the whole point. That was the core of it. And to feel so welcome and accepted is a feeling I wish everybody could feel. But it's my privilege to be able to say that I've even felt that. Right. And I'm aware of that.
Right.
And I know that there are things that will prevent people from walking through those doors day in and day out. But I would love for anybody watching that's never been to any of these events with you, with me, with anybody that is even remotely interested in this world, take a chance.
For sure.
Because that is a safe space.
Oh,
that is their entire credo. And I love that part about it, but that's what it was then, and that's what I think it will always be. I hope it gets to be a point where there's no doubt in anyone's mind that if they were so inclined to go into one of these places, even by themselves, that they would be welcome, because they are. But it's hard to want to do something like that, especially if none of your friends want to go. Can you imagine? I can't, because
No,
if nobody wants to go with me, I'll go alone.
Yeah,
but I feel like a lot of people won't go unless they're with their squad or their crew, and a lot of their friends might try to make fun of them for it. And I know that that's a lot of the reason that a couple of people that I know won't ever go, because they're like, I've made fun of you for years. You think you're never going to give it to me? You're not wrong, but you're welcome there.
Right.
And the door's always open.
Most definitely. And I think that that's well said. And, I just wish that, it sounds like a fantasy in some respects, but I think that if our culture and society here in the United States, and even globally, but, in this context, about this moment that we're in, if our society was more reflective of like really the EDM culture, the issues that we have right now would be minimal. They may not even exist. And I think, going back to what you mentioned in Senegal, Hallie, talking about, people of color, and specifically, I can even speak to this specifically, and so could you, your experience going to these festivals and such, Black people just not having their, feeling associated or feeling welcome or feeling like that's a space for them, which there's, as you talked about already, there's extreme irony there because this, this music has its roots in Black culture. And, it speaks to a lot of like, what my conversations are going to be about, over these next, this next month or so. And the fact that, it's beautiful for them, but not for us. So for instance, when you're talking about, the music and the scene getting its origins with people of color, the LGBTQ community, marginalized communities, it wasn't hot. You know what I mean? It got suppressed, popped off in Europe, got exploded and such. Then you have, practically whatever you want to say, 90%, 85% maybe white DJs. And then it gets
easily
catches on and explodes because, it's seen in a different light, in a different lens. And we talked about the whitewashing and such. And, it was appropriated in a sense. And that doesn't mean to say that people, white people can't like this music. Like white people couldn't like, Deborah Cox or Diana Ross or the Supremes or, back in the day, watch Soul Train. That's not even the case. It's also about, I think, ultimately knowing, where things came from. And I think that what I'm trying to say is, that translation over time, I think Black culture just didn't realize that. They just don't know that. They don't know that they have roots in EDM. They don't know that they have roots in, electronic dance music, and that it was born from, disco and techno and such that essentially came out of our urban environments and everything like that. So it's just very, very interesting, and it's ironic and such. And I'm curious. Also, I think another point of it is, sorry to ramble, but I think another point of it is, as well as to your point about the inclusivity part. So, seeing DJs that look like you, And again, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you have an appreciation for the music, you have appreciation for the music. But I think in some respects, some of the, the culture or whatever. I mean, I remember the first time I saw Green Velvet, you know what I mean? And I was like, this what's up, you know what I'm saying? This is a brother up here, spinning this and doing
Sure.
this, you know what I mean? So, there's that community, it's all communal. I mean, the EDM scene is community. This was born out of community. You certainly have that kind of connection a little bit with the people that are creating the music and making the music and having appreciation for that in that regard. So I think it's great. I mean, I think this is an opportunity for people in the scene to have a broader conversation. Because I'll be real with you, like I don't have these kind of dialogues or conversations as it relates to the root of EDM and the historical context there. I think and that's ultimately the point of this whole series, this 37 conversation series, is simply just having conversations and speaking. And it's not always though people have been saying and they've been talking to me about how they've been learning from the conversations that I've had thus far. I think this is the most informative, honestly, to me. And that might be just, my bias because I already kind of knew of some of the stuff I was speaking about before. But I think this is very informative, and not that was necessarily the point. I think when people are learning about their history and learning about the context, I was talking to, a good friend of mine earlier, Larry, that was here. It's about knowing where you come from, and you have a greater appreciation for it. And then you also get a greater appreciation for the music, and, I just think that's it's a great opportunity. And also, I mean, there are things in our society, sports, music, film, different types of media. But I think that probably, challenging sports potentially, I think music's the one thing that brings us together more than anything else. And,
And food.
Say what?
And food.
Oh, food. Yeah, no doubt. Without a doubt. Now, you're right. You're right. And if you got them all at the same time, it's great. So, but yeah, and I think it's a great opportunity for people to learn from. And it's a great opportunity for people to really just, really get an understanding of the vibe and understanding of exactly what you said. Like, you all are welcome. And I think it's an opportunity to really, be intentional with that message, and being intentional with the fact that, this is a space that, if society looked like that, if the greater society as a whole, if it was more emblematic as to what was going on in our communities and everything, all this bias, all this implicit bias, all this, even explicit bias, racism, all that kind of stuff wouldn't really exist. Because as you said, at an EDM festival or an EDM concert, I mean, no one cares what you look like. No one cares what you're wearing. No one cares what your orientation is. No one cares what your skin color is. It is legitimately just.
And if anything, it's going to be celebrated, if anything. So Exactly. It's like, it's not even that they just don't care at all and it's blank face. It's that somebody's going to walk by you and they're going to be like, yes, like they're going to love what you've got going on, and they're going to feel your energy. And that it's a feeling I can't describe, and I just want more people to experience, because when people hype you up that you don't know, where you can feel the love and it's super genuine, but it's only because you are existing in your truest form, like that's the most validating feeling that anyone could ever hope to feel. And that feeling is what so many Black people in America especially never get to feel. Right. They never get to feel like they can take up space. They never get to feel like their voices are being amplified or heard to begin with, let alone made louder. And there's so many things that people can do to change those patterns, even if it starts with you, even if it starts with your home, your friends, and your direct family. That's just it. There's so much credit that should be owed to these people that created this entire industry, and we owe them an infinite debt. And I think if more Black people were aware of their own roots in this world, they would even be able to better lift it up, because they would contribute to it again. They would feel connected to it. Because when you don't feel that connection, you're not going to participate, you're not going to patronize it, and you're not going to contribute.
Yep.
But it's theirs, it's yours. It's definitely something that I think it needs to change immediately. Because if I were to be able to reach more people with that fact, with house music is Black music, even just that one phrase, if I could really reach people with that, I think a lot of people would be like, I don't believe you, or there's no way, or are you sure, or right. Okay, who invented it then? Right. And then I could be like, well, It just so happens that Frankie Knuckles created it.
Yep.
And it's, and you can name names. There are documentaries on this that I would suggest everybody to participate in and watch and spread and share. And there's a lot to be said for what people did because of the oppression that they were feeling at the time. So using what we're feeling right now, using the oppression that we're feeling as a country right now, using the shame that I feel in my police departments in New York City, using all of these feelings to create positive change by spreading the truth, because it is true. Dance music is Black music. If you think about it on a very base level, bass lines, those are yours. Black music, jazz, funk, electro, synth, all of it, it's yours. And it's something that everything else is riding on the back of, essentially. And to understand that is to understand that there is a place at this table for you always, because it is your table.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. I'll be interested to see, how things maybe evolve, or, if festivals or organizers or promoters start walking the walk a little bit, because it was, everyone was on that train, what was it, last Tuesday or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And even EDC and, Sunset Music Festival and some other music festivals I've seen, I'd be real curious to know, about the inclusion aspect. We all know how it goes with headliners, and then you have mid headliners, and you have, some of the upcoming artists, be able to have that intentionality behind getting some of those, local artists or artists of color, or DJs of color, I should say, excuse me, to be engaged in the scene and everything like that, because going back to its roots, and that'd be something very interesting to see, how that evolves over time. I've not done this in any of my conversations yet, but we have a question here that I want to kick to you, Hallie. Karina asked, if there are any particular documentaries specifically that you have in mind that you would want to
Absolutely. I will pop off of this so that I can actually get the link on YouTube, because it's a YouTube documentary. It was not on YouTube originally, but it was pulled and then downloaded and uploaded onto YouTube for spreadability. Because it's recent enough. It was just around when Frankie Knuckles died that they decided to put this together. And so I would love to give you that information, and I will do that.
Yeah,
I see your tag here, so I can just message you.
Yeah, and what I'll do also is I will when I upload this to Instagram, I'll get that link and I'll just put it in the comments so people can see it.
For sure.
Well. No doubt. This was great. Anything else you wanted to share?
Basically just to dive into what our values are a little bit more thoroughly.
Yeah,
the peace, the love, the unity, and the respect. It seems like a pipe dream that we could all embody those things every day in everything that we do, but all you need to do is try. If you do one every day, you've done more than most people are doing, and most people have done in the last 100 years. And this scene being so new, we're at about year 50 of when all this started. And the evolution that we've seen from then to now is still so miraculous and so different from where we are now compared to where we were then. But the cultural implications and the oppression are still there. And that's a problem.
Yep.
And the more that we can do to dismantle those things, it seems so shallow when I say it that way, but I mean it. I mean it with every fiber of my being. Because the fact that this scene was born from oppression and feeling like you had no place that was safe for you, and knowing that people feel that right now in America as a Black man, as a Black woman, as a Black child, it's crippling, and we need to fix that. And I know that I'm doing everything that I can within my power, within my privilege especially, and I would love for people to utilize the pillars of togetherness, community, culture, creativity, and peace, love, unity, and respect in order to move forward from this and build something positive from it.
Without a doubt. I love it. This was great. This was so great. I would have been snapping, but I didn't want to interrupt your discussion, your speaking and such. So I really appreciate your time, Hallie. Everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, without a doubt. Hallie's Instagram is Geller, Geller. Yeah, so that's Hallie. So make sure you check her out, give her a follow. My friend over here is very versed in the culture, and she knows it very well. So I might be hitting you back up, Hallie. I might be hitting you back up for one of these. I appreciate the vibe and appreciate your knowledge. So
Happy to
tomorrow,
rejoin because I'm also in New York City, unlike where you are. So I'm on a completely different end of the country and
right?
can offer perhaps a bit of a different perspective as far as what's still going on here and what everything else is progressing.
Yeah, that's what's up. No, that's that context is critical without a doubt. Tomorrow I've had guests. Hallie was today. My father was last night. But tomorrow, day 6, for 37 conversations, we're gonna have a conversation about the hypocrisy in this moment that we're experiencing right now. So that's it for right now. So I'm gonna say good night to you, Hallie. I'll hit you up later, and I appreciate everybody joining. So have a good evening. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.